When I first walked into Virion Systems, there wasn't even a proper sign on the door, just a faded paper taped to the glass that read Ring Bell Tech inside. It wasn't a company yet. It was a collection of desks crammed into a converted storage unit on the edge of Austin. No one had titles and everyone drank the same burned coffee out of chipped mugs. But I wasn't there for titles. I was there for the blank canvas. They hadn't figured out their infrastructure. The servers ran hot, the workflow was chaotic, and their internal systems looked like someone had duct-taped a spreadsheet to a whiteboard and prayed it wouldn't crash. I didn't complain. I unpacked my laptop, rolled up my sleeves, and started building. It wasn't glamorous. I spent nights on a folding cot in the corner writing code with a space heater humming at my feet. Pulse Frame was born in silence, line by line, module by module, until one day it just worked. Inventory synced without crashing. Reporting dashboards updated in real time. People stopped yelling across the office because now the system spoke for them. It didn't just hold the company together, it was the company. No one asked me to call it Pulse Frame. I just liked the way it sounded like something alive, something that didn't just run, but breathed. And for years it was my second heartbeat. When Malcolm pitched to investors, he used screenshots of Pulse Frame. When the company landed its first major federal contract, it was because Pulse Frame passed every audit. And when people asked how we scaled so fast, the answer was always quietly hiding in the background: my code, my architecture, my systems. I never asked for recognition. I just wanted it to work. I wanted to build something that mattered. And for a long time I believed I had. Until the day someone else started signing their name at the bottom of my blueprint. The announcement came during an all-hands meeting, Malcolm standing in front of a new branded backdrop, a little too proud of the glossy investor deck behind him. "We've secured Series C," he said, grinning like he'd just won a lottery he didn't buy a ticket for. "And with growth comes new vision." That's when he introduced him Toby Dane, 25. Fresh out of Stanford with an MBA he wore like a crown. Malcolm made a show of saying Toby would be shadowing senior leaders, but I didn't need a memo to read the subtext. He was family. And family didn't shadow. Family inherited. The first time I met him in person, he shook my hand like it was optional. "You're the systems guy, right?" Malcolm said, "I should get a sense of your architecture, see where we can streamline things." Streamline things. He said it with a straight face, like he hadn't walked into a building running on 12 years of architecture I'd written by hand. Still, I kept it professional. I walked him through Pulse Frame's front-end interface, the modular subsystems, the way we layered real-time analytics. He nodded a lot, offered suggestions, and asked whether we'd considered shifting to a lighter framework, something more scalable like a no-code solution. That night I stayed late, not out of obligation, out of instinct. I opened the access logs. And there it was, back-end credentials tied to an admin session at 2:11 a.m., linked to T. Dane. The audit trail didn't lie. He'd logged into Pulse Frame's core kernel-level access and pulled system maps I hadn't even shown him. No clearance, no explanation, just entitlement. At first I told myself Malcolm had granted it. Maybe he wanted Toby to learn. Maybe it was a mistake. But deep down, I recognized the pattern. I'd seen it before in startups that grew too fast and forgot who kept the engines running. The founder makes a deal with capital. Capital brings its own people. And one day, without warning, the man who built the house finds himself holding the door open for the next tenant. The next morning, Toby greeted me with that same smug cheer. "Jonas, mind if I loop you into some roadmap discussions, thinking we need to consolidate ops, simplify the brain?" I looked at him and forced a nod. But inside, something shifted. He wasn't here to learn from me. He was here to replace me. And by the time I opened the next log file, I realized he'd already started. The announcement came during an all-hands meeting, Malcolm standing in front of a new branded backdrop, a little too proud of the glossy investor deck behind him. "We've secured Series C," he said, grinning like he'd just won a lottery he didn't buy a ticket for. "And with growth comes new vision." That's when he introduced him Toby Dane, 25, fresh out of Stanford with an MBA he wore like a crown. Malcolm made a show of saying Toby would be shadowing senior leaders, but I didn't need a memo to read the subtext. He was family, and family didn't shadow. Family inherited. The first time I met him in person, he shook my hand like it was optional. "You're the systems guy, right?" Malcolm said. "I should get a sense of your architecture, see where we can streamline things." Streamline things. He said it with a straight face, like he hadn't walked into a building running on 12 years of architecture I'd written by hand. Still, I kept it professional. I walked him through PulseFrame's front-end interface, the modular subsystems, the way we layered real-time analytics. He nodded a lot, offered suggestions, and asked whether we'd considered shifting to a lighter framework, something more scalable like a no-code solution. That night I stayed late. Not out of obligation, out of instinct. I opened the access logs, and there it was, back-end credentials tied to an admin session at 2:11 a.m., linked to T. Dane. The audit trail didn't lie. He'd logged into PulseFrame's core kernel-level access and pulled system maps I hadn't even shown him. No clearance, no explanation, just entitlement. At first I told myself Malcolm had granted it. Maybe he wanted Toby to learn. Maybe it was a mistake. But deep down, I recognized the pattern. I'd seen it before in startups that grew too fast and forgot who kept the engines running. The founder makes a deal with capital. Capital brings its own people. And one day, without warning, the man who built the house finds himself holding the door open for the next tenant. The next morning, Toby greeted me with that same smug cheer. "Jonas, mind if I loop you into some roadmap discussions, thinking we need to consolidate ops, simplify the brain?" I looked at him and forced a nod. But inside, something shifted. He wasn't here to learn from me. He was here to replace me. And by the time I opened the next log file, I realized he'd already started. The memo came mid-week, buried between calendar invites and bug reports. Vortex OS, it read in bold at the top. Internal initiative, confidential. Assigned contributors, T. Dane M. Dane and a few engineers I'd never worked with directly. I opened the project directory. The structure was too familiar. Function trees, data sync modules, back-end configuration. It was PulseFrame, reskinned, renamed, and reorganized just enough to pretend it wasn't mine. Even the sequence IDs followed the same conventions I'd written in 2014 when we first integrated with the payment gateway. I didn't say anything. Not that day. I closed the file, locked my screen, and went to grab coffee. Toby passed me in the hall, too busy talking into his Bluetooth mic to notice the look on my face. He was pitching Vortex OS to someone, maybe an investor. "Clean slate," he said. "Built from the ground up. Built from the ground up." That night I stayed late again. I went deeper this time, pulling audit trails, Git history, and version control metadata. They hadn't just copied the structure. They'd lifted entire blocks of code. Some still carried my original comments. Fix temporary workaround for Q3 downtime. The attribution tags were stripped, but the fingerprints were mine. The next morning, HR requested a one-on-one. "There's going to be some organizational shifting," the rep said, her voice tight and overpracticed. "Restructuring. We'll need your flexibility." She smiled like it was a favor. I nodded. Of course. I didn't flinch. I didn't ask questions. I thanked her, stood up, and shook her hand. Then I went home, unlocked the second drawer in my filing cabinet, and pulled out a flash drive labeled Vault 0. Inside were 3 files. The first, The original pulse frame licensing agreement, drafted under my personal consulting business, filed 2 months before my first full-time contract with Virion. The second, a clean copy of the source code, time-stamped, backed up and signed digitally through a third-party ledger. The third, a patent filing dated August 2013. Status approved. Assignee Jonas Vey. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. They thought I was just the guy who built the engine. They forgot I owned the ignition key. And as I began writing the first steps of a silent extraction protocol, I already knew how this would end. The boardroom was already cold when I walked in, like someone had set the thermostat low just to make sure no one got too comfortable. Malcolm sat at the head of the table, tie loosened sleeves rolled. Toby was there too, tapping on a tablet he probably didn't understand, nodding like he was listening to something more important than what was about to be said. Malcolm cleared his throat and gave me the kind of smile that's been rehearsed in a mirror. "Jonas, we appreciate everything you've done. You've built something impressive. Truly. But as we grow, we're embracing new frameworks, new leadership. It's time for Virion to evolve." He used words like pivot vision and next chapter. It was the kind of monologue that tried to sound collaborative, but landed more like a eulogy for a job I hadn't even finished. I nodded once. "Of course," I said. "Let me draft a proper transition plan." Toby blinked, then glanced at Malcolm like he hadn't expected it to go so smoothly. Neither of them knew what that smile on my face actually meant. By the time I returned to my desk, I already had the file open. Termination notice number 1, not a resignation letter, not a goodbye. It was the first of 3 steps in a protocol I'd written years ago in case Virion ever tried to claim PulseFrame as their own. It wasn't a kill switch, it was a quiet retraction. Piece by piece, subtle enough to be ignored, critical enough to matter. As I uploaded the file to the cloud node, I thought back to a meeting in 2013. Malcolm and I sat in a rented conference room reviewing integration options. I offered to roll PulseFrame into the company, officially move the license under Virion's name once the legal team finalized paperwork. He said, "Let's circle back after Q1. No rush." He never brought it up again. Neither did I. Years passed. Departments expanded, new faces came and went, and still PulseFrame ran quietly in the background, leased through my consulting license. They used it, they built on it, but they never owned it. Not even close. That little detail, buried in a line of contract language Malcolm never bothered to revisit. I packed up my things that afternoon. No goodbyes, no speeches, just a clean drive, an old server access token, and a system I'd kept legally mine. By the time I reached my apartment, the first automated revocation had gone live. They wouldn't notice anything yet, not for a few days, maybe a week. But the foundation had already shifted. By the 3rd day, the cracks weren't just visible, they were widening. Customer support couldn't access ticket histories. Calls were being dropped mid-escalation. On the finance end, recurring billing began misfiring, charging clients twice or not at all. Internally, teams scrambled. Project leads started working from offline spreadsheets. Operations called it a temporary glitch. Toby called it an isolated sync issue. But the system wasn't syncing. It wasn't isolated. It was bleeding. I watched from my apartment. I didn't need access to their servers to know what was happening. PulseFrame was too deeply embedded. Every delay, every crash, every system timeout, it echoed a piece of architecture they no longer understood. By the 4th morning, Malcolm left a voicemail. "Jonas, there's been a bit of a miscommunication. We could use your help walking through a few transition hiccups. Call me back." I didn't call. I forwarded a single email reply. No subject, no pleasantries, just a PDF attachment, the original licensing agreement, notarized, countersigned, and watermarked. The accompanying patent number sat in bold at the top, followed by a line they'd apparently never bothered to read. Usage granted under non-transferable lease. License subject to revocation with written notice. No threats, no accusations, just proof. 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed. I didn't answer. Then came a string of texts from people who hadn't spoken to me in months. Are you seeing this? Is this you? Please tell me this is reversible. Toby. I heard locked himself in the server room for hours trying to restore the latest build, but there was no backup, no clean fork of pulse frame they could deploy. What they had wasn't a duplicate, it was a skin. They'd borrowed the engine and painted over the name, and now the core was gone. Some departments tried migrating to third-party tools. One team switched to paper tracking, another attempted to patch an open-source module. Nothing held. The infrastructure had grown too dependent, too interconnected, too central to replace on the fly. I imagined Malcolm pacing in his office watching dashboards flicker, investors refreshing KPIs that no longer refreshed. I pictured Toby opening code snippets he didn't write, not knowing which lines mattered or why the dependencies wouldn't resolve. They hadn't taken a system. They'd built a house of cards on someone else's blueprint. And now, one card had been quietly pulled. It began with a click. From the desk in my apartment, I ran the shell script I'd written years ago and never thought I'd use. Kill switch echo. Not dramatic, not loud, just efficient. It didn't break the system, it peeled it back. One layer at a time. First to go were the analytics queues. No alerts, no red flags, just a delay, 5 seconds, then 30. Reports began generating with stale data. Forecasts drifted off course by fractions, not enough to panic, just enough to make them second-guess their metrics. Next, the sync engine. Client records stopped pushing to the dashboard in real time. Call center agents began refreshing their screens. Operations blamed it on the network. They always do at first. Then came the emails. The first was from someone in logistics. Jonas, small delays in the inventory tracker. Can you advise? I didn't reply. The second arrived the next morning. Subject line, urgent. Pulse frame, lagging across regions. Jenna from operations. Her tone was different, less casual. She was worried. The third came by noon. Please. Just one word in the subject line, sent from Malcolm's assistant. No body text, just a forwarded chain with escalating frustration. I stared at it for a moment, then archived it. That afternoon I walked to the cafe down the street and ordered my usual. I sat near the window and watched traffic flow past like it always did, fast, chaotic, indifferent. I sipped slowly, checking nothing. Back at home, I pulled up the status logs. The disconnection was progressing exactly as designed, dependency modules cut, task coordination degraded, security layers out of sync. The system wasn't crashing, it was hollowing out. Still standing on the surface but already rotting from the core. They wouldn't understand what was happening, not yet. They'd reboot, reroute, reinstall. They'd blame junior engineers, blame Toby, blame bad luck. But they wouldn't look at the license key, because that key was mine, and I had just revoked it. The first offer came less than 12 hours after I sent the license agreement. Malcolm called again twice this time, then followed up with an email. We'd like to discuss a return. Senior role. Triple your current rate. Full control over Vortex OS. I didn't respond. A second message came from the board chair. It was more polished, full of legal flourishes and carefully worded assurances. We acknowledge your original contribution and would welcome a conversation around equity to reflect that value. Still nothing from me. Then came the threat. Our legal team is preparing a response, Malcolm wrote. If this was intentional disruption, we may be looking at grounds for damages. That one made me smile. I replied once. The email was short, just 2 lines. The license has been terminated. All usage must cease. This is not sabotage, it's retraction. No argument, no justification, just fact. HR went silent. Legal stopped bluffing. There were no more voicemails, no follow-ups, no sudden change of tone, just quiet. And in that quiet, the unraveling accelerated. I watched as Virion's online presence shifted. Social media managers stopped posting. Product updates stalled. The investor page was taken offline. Word spread in industry circles something was wrong and no one inside the company was talking. I expected a few people to reach out. Maybe the engineers I trained, the interns I mentored. But there was nothing. Just radio silence. Whether it was fear, guilt, or self-preservation, I didn't know. But the silence wasn't just corporate, it was personal. They didn't just lose a system. They lost the man who built it. And as the weeks passed and the company spiraled deeper into confusion, I didn't raise my voice or write a post or take a victory lap. I just watched the lights go out one floor at a time. 3 weeks after I walked out of Virion, I signed with Kentrax. They didn't ask for references. They didn't ask what happened. They asked what I wanted to build next. They offered full autonomy, a private dev team, and the one thing Virion never did respect. I relocated to Denver. A new office, a blank board, a clean slate. The first message came quietly, then another, then 3 more in the same day. Jonas, if you're building again, we'd follow you this time. They weren't the loud ones, not the ones who called me obsolete in meetings or parroted Toby's jargon. These were the ones who stayed late to test features no one saw. The ones who watched it all unfold and said nothing but not out of fear, out of something else, out of knowing. I didn't hold it against them. I invited them in. We didn't rebuild PulseFrame. We made something cleaner, stronger, better. Not out of revenge, but design. PulseFrame 2.0 launched 3 months later. The new dashboard carried my full name in the footer. Not tucked away. Not hidden in source comments, bold, centered. When the press asked if it was a response to what happened at Virion, I told them it wasn't. It was what I'd always planned to build. I just finally had the space to do it right, and for the first time in over a decade it was mine from the first line to the last. Epilogue. One signature. The patent hangs on the wall behind me now. Same document, same date, August 2013. But it feels different here. Not like a shield, more like a bookmark, a reminder of what I built and what I walked away from. This office is quiet. No frantic Slack pings, no buzzwords bleeding through conference calls. Just the hum of machines doing what they were designed to do. And people who don't need to be convinced why it matters. An email pings near the end of the day. Virion's board has voted to dissolve operations. I stare at it for a moment, then move it to archive. No fireworks, no satisfaction. Just the last inevitable line in a story they wrote themselves. Later, someone forwards a screenshot. Toby's LinkedIn is gone. Malcolm, last anyone heard, is being reviewed by investors from another project. The kind of quiet distancing that follows when your name becomes a liability. I don't reply, I don't gloat, I don't forward it to anyone. I shut down my screen pull on my coat and walk the few blocks home. The sun's still up. I water the garden. Tomatoes this season, maybe peppers next. My hands are steadier these days. Some stories don't end with slamming doors or final speeches. They end in stillness, in paperwork, in proof. And mine ended with a signature.